Hello, so we're back at it again with the respiratory system. And so we're kind of just adding on to what we've already talked about. So we talked about like how air gets into the body, and we talked about gas exchange between O2 coming in and CO2 going out, and the different anatomy and whatnot, and where it flows through, and yada yada yada. So now we're going to talk about kind of like the more mathematical side of it, which is like so we're inhaling air in, but how exactly are we getting it into our body? Like how is it coming in? And the answer to that is it's being forced in via pressure gradients. So because the atmospheric pressure is usually equivalent to, so atmospheric pressure, right? So it's the pressure of the atmosphere, of the air all around us. And why does it not completely squash us into an oblivion? Well, it's because we have a similar pressure internally that kind of counters that. So in order to bring air in, it's going to move down a pressure gradient. And when we're moving down a pressure gradient, we want to move from high pressure to low pressure. That's how we get it to move, because it wants to be, if it's all cramped up in the high pressure, it wants to go where there's room, right? That's where it's going to flow automatically. So atmospheric pressure out here, okay, and that's going to be PATM for abbreviation, pressure atmosphere. Intrapulmonary pressure, pulmonary inside our lungs, inside the alveolus, our air sac, where we perform respiration, right? Okay, and then we have intrapleural pressure. So around our lungs, we have the visceral pleura, which is it's connected to the lungs, right? So we have the visceral pleura, we have a serous cavity is what it's called, and it has some fluid in it, serous fluid. And then we have the visceral pleura, which connects us to the rib cage. Okay, I know that's kind of confusing. And it's kind of like all the same membrane, but it's kind of folded. So I don't know. The best way you could think about it is the visceral pleura, visceral organ, is attached to the lungs. Then there's an open space, and it has serous fluid in it, and that's the cavity. And on the outside of that is the parietal pleura, and that attaches to our rib cage. And that's how when we're breathing, the parietal pleura is pulling on that visceral pleura, and it's helping expand the lungs as well. So yeah, let's get into it. Okay, so these drawings are terrible. But anyways, so we want to breathe in. So we're going to inhale the air. I already told you that these two typically stay equal, the intrapulmonary pressure and the atmospheric pressure. But how do we change that pressure? Well, we create more room in our body, because the larger the volume of something, the lower the pressure, right? Because there's more room. We're not crammed. We're not uptight, high pressure, like a pressure crock pot about to explode, right? So we want to bring oxygen in. So we're going to breathe in, and we're going to contract the diaphragm, and it's going to go flat instead of the normal curve that it is. And when the diaphragm pulls down on that thoracic cavity, it's going to create more space in here for our lungs. So when we increase more space, we're increasing the volume. So what we just did is we lowered the pressure inside our body. So now when we're breathing in the air, the air is gonna flow into our body happily because there's room for it in there. There's more room in there than outside, so we're going in. Okay, so that's where we're at right here. Where intrapleural pressure comes in, we can't always be like, how do I explain this? The main, like, if we were forcing ourselves to breathe, we could only do that on our own for so long before it just uses up way too much energy. So there has to be another mechanism in place for us to help us breathe with our lungs, right? So that's where the intrapleural pressure comes in, is because when you take that breath in, the way that the visceral pleura and the parietal pleura, the way that they are structured is when you breathe in, it has this vacuum effect where it's like sucking up and sticking. And that has everything to do with the way it's positioned and the water that's in there. So the water being in the serous fluid in the cavity helps when you breathe in, the parietal pleura moves with the rib cage, because your ribs kind of move up and out when you breathe in due to your intercostal muscles. So it's going to pull with the ribs, and then it's going to pull the visceral pleura with it. And the visceral pleura is attached to our lungs, so it's pulling our lungs with it. And that's going to create a negative pressure. And this negative pressure is always going to be -4 from atmospheric pressure. And the reason why it's always -4 from atmospheric pressure is because atmospheric pressure can change depending on where you are, right? We all know that. You climb a mountain, the atmospheric pressure is going to be lower than if you were down at sea level. Okay, so that's inhalation, bringing it in. It's following the pressure gradient. It became lower in the body. We are now not equal to atmospheric pressure because we've created more space in the body, therefore creating more volume, therefore lowering the pressure, therefore we're moving from high to low from the atmosphere into the body. Okay, great. Okay, so exhalation is going to occur when we relax. We're relaxing the diaphragm. This is kind of a very passive thing, like this, where we're breathing in and muscles are contracting. This exhalation is you're at rest, air is just going to go out. And that's because the diaphragm has now gone up, created less space up here in the thoracic cavity. Therefore, pressure is higher inside the body and lower outside the body. So we're out of here. It's too crowded. Okay. Boom. So the gases of the atmosphere. So these percents will always stay the same. So the atmosphere gases are, let's see what we got here: nitrogen, oxygen, carbon dioxide, and water. So those percents will always stay the same, but atmospheric pressure can change, like we already talked about. But if we want to figure out like what portion of these gases are in our environment, like in millimeters of mercury, we'll take the atmospheric pressure and we will times it by these percents. And that's how we'll figure out what portion of it is in the air. So if we wanted to do nitrogen here, let's say we're at sea level. So atmospheric pressure is at 760 millimeters of mercury. So we'll take 78% and and we'll times it by 760, the atmospheric pressure. So nitrogen gas makes up 592.8% millimeters in mercury out of the atmospheric pressure. So the ratio would be like 593 to 760. So it takes up, it's 78% of it. It's a lot. Why we need to know that when we already have the percentage is beyond me. But that's what I was taught. So, Jesus. Okay, anyways, moving on. All right, so partial pressure just kind of talks about how these gases follow their very own gradient. So oxygen will follow its very own pressure gradient, CO2 will follow its very own pressure gradient, and that can happen simultaneously because just because the pressure of oxygen is high in one place doesn't mean it's high there for carbon dioxide. They follow their own pressure gradients simultaneously right next to each other. Okay, so, and this is really cool because when we're talking about, when we're talking about air coming in and then it's in the lungs and then it's in the alveolar sac going into the capillaries, this is explaining mathematically why that is happening through the pressure gradient. So that's why it's really important here. Okay, so let's see what I got here, if I have that here. I can't remember if that's what this is or not. I don't remember if that's what this is or not. Okay, anyways, I can't remember if those numbers are that or not, but pretty much what I'm trying to say is, actually, I think it is. Bear with me, people. Okay, so let's say we breathed in, let's say we breathed in air. Okay, so we breathed in the air, we went through the conducting system, we went to the respiratory system, we're in the alveolar sac, and we're oxygen, and we want to go into the blood. So how is oxygen going to go into the blood? Well, it's going to diffuse into the blood because the oxygen in the alveolus is higher than it is in the blood capillary. So because it's higher in the alveolus, it will diffuse into the blood capillary, and that's how it's getting from the alveolus into our blood, is because it's still following that same pressure gradient. And the same thing is going to happen with CO2. So as CO2 is trying to get out of our body, and it's coming through the blood, deoxygenated blood, and it's in the blood capillary, and it's trying to exit. It's like, I gotta go, I gotta get outside. CO2 is high in pressure in here, and I need a breath of fresh air, and I need some space. So it's gonna come up into that blood capillary, and CO2 is gonna diffuse into the alveolus, and then the alveolus is gonna push it out of the body, and it's also following a pressure gradient. So it's gonna be at a lower level of millimeters mercury. I'm pointing at oxygen, excuse me. CO2 is going to be at a lower level of millimeters in mercury inside the body than it is outside of the body. So it's out of there. It's following that pressure gradient. And the way we control that pressure gradient is through volume size. So a lot of how that's happening is from the very beginning with our diaphragm. We're shrinking this upper portion of our body. It's shrinking. Okay, so pressure is high, so bye, we're leaving. When you expand it, pressure is lower, we're coming in. And then something to touch on that was mentioned in my lecture was both pressure and solubility of the gas determine the movement. So some of these are very soluble, but like an example, like nitrogen is not very soluble. It can't really get into the blood like that, and it's not supposed to, so it's good that it's set up like that. But a way you could think of like atmospheric pressure and then like a kind of a negative dark effect that could have is they mention like scuba divers when they go all the way down and they're below sea level. And if they come up too quickly and they don't allow the pressures in their body to acclimate to them slowly coming up, they're going to force nitrous into their blood, which is something that's really, really hard to do. But under those extreme conditions, it can be forced into the blood. And when you force nitrogen into the blood, it bubbles and you die. So yeah, hope this makes sense to you guys. This really helped me store the information in my head, and I have a test tonight, so I'm just blown through these videos. Let me know what you guys think. I'm really curious, like if you guys take A&P and if you think I'm doing a good job. I know my very first videos, I was very stuttery and kind of nervous because I don't do this and I'm not an expert. So, but I think as I keep making videos, it sounds a lot better. So any suggestions you guys have, or if you see me misrepresenting the information, please share in the comments, because that could be really fun for me, at least. I mean, I'm learning more and it's kind of interactive. So let me know what you guys think. Again, this is the respiratory system and how we're moving gases through it. And it's all happening through a pressure gradients. Kind of like our blood. So yeah, lots of cool stuff. I literally love it. All right, bye.